Hi guys, this is just a short video on what to do if you're having problems starting your lawnmower after it's set all winter. Lawnmowers have 4-stroke motors on them, just like your car does. And as you guys have been learning, they need fuel, spark, air, and compression to run. All of these are pretty easily testable. Compression you can test by just pulling on the rope pull, and if it has roughly the same resistance that it did last time you used it, your compression is probably okay. Air is also easy to check. You would just pull off the air cleaner, make sure that that's not all clogged and the passage into the motor is not clogged. And you can even test air by rotating the motor over and seeing if there's suction on the intake. Spark is likewise easy to test. You would just unscrew the spark plug, leave the high tension lead on, and ground the spark plug base to the cylinder head and pull the rope, and you should see a blue spark jump the gap. Most of the time spark's not an issue with these motors, but it could be. And then fuel is the last thing. It's easy to test, maybe just a little bit more difficult to diagnose. If you've got compression, air, and spark, you can always squirt a little starting fluid in the intake of your motor and give it a quick pull, and you should hear at least some popping. It might even run for a short time. If it does, then you've got a fuel issue, and you can look for a clogged fuel filter, but it's most likely in these small motors the carburetor. The carburetors are not designed for use with ethanol-based fuels, and of course, as you know, that is all we have these days. But the ethanol actually eats away at the parts of the carburetor and causes them to malfunction. So let me just go over some carburetor basics. This is not a lawnmower carburetor, but this is a carburetor off of my 1929 Model A. It is very similar to your mower carburetor, except it's just a little larger. And once you learn the fundamentals of this carburetor, they're all the same, so you'll be good to go. Here you can see there's the fuel inlet. This is the throttle. I'll show you how that works in a minute. And this down here is the choke. And the throttle actually rotates this butterfly, and the butterfly adjusts the amount of air that goes through the carb. And here's the air intake. The choke, I don't know if you can see it, but the choke is also a butterfly that sits right here, and it's just a larger butterfly that cuts off all the air to the motor, and then when the vacuum comes, when you're trying to start it, it pulls in fuel instead of fuel and air. All right, so let's take a look at how a carburetor works. They'll have a top half and a bottom half, or they'll have a bowl assembly. Either way, there will be several components that come apart. This comes apart in two pieces. It's got a top half and a bottom half. So let's look at the bottom half first. Here is the carburetor bowl, and here the fuel comes in, fills up this bowl to a pre-specified level. And this little hole down in the bottom is connected to this tube right here, and that tube is where the gasoline spray comes out into your motor. You have to keep the fuel level here relatively constant to get consistent atomization into your motor, so there has to be a mechanism to keep this fuel stable so it can come out this tube at a predetermined rate. And that mechanism is found in the top of the carburetor, and it's the float. And I'm going to turn it upside down here. And here's the float, and it is attached to a little hinge, and there is a valve right here called the needle and seat, and that's the problem for most of these carburetors. So let me show you how that works. So we're going to pull this pin, and we'll take the float out, and this float can be made of brass, it can be made of cork, it can be made of plastic. It just has to be something that floats in gasoline. And here is the needle and seat. You can see that this one is serviceable, it has a slot cut in it for a screwdriver, and you can back this piece out. If it becomes defective, get a new one, put it in, and you'll be good to go. The gas comes in here and goes through this. This is a little valve, and I'll show you how that valve works. If you dump it out, this is the needle, and it's called a needle because it looks like a needle. It's got a cone on one side. It's a tapered cone, and there is a matching tapered cone on the inside of this, and when those two cones are forced together, it shuts off the gasoline from this intake. Now, this is a steel needle, and this is a brass seat. The seats in your carburetor on your mower are plastic, and at the bottom they have an O-ring. It's just easier to manufacture. And that O-ring swells up when there's a bunch of alcohol in the fuel. So we're going to put that back in, and when that swells up, then in fact no gasoline can come through. So let me put this back together. I'm going to set the camera down for a second. So you can test carburetor floats, needles, and seats really easy. What you do is you put a tube here and you blow into it. And if the float is all the way down, that seat should be shut, and you should not be able to blow through there. If you can blow through there, the seat is defective and it must be replaced. Now, when you're blowing, you should be able to raise the float, and now that valve will be open. Now you should be able to blow through it. If you can't blow through it, the seat's defective and must be replaced. And again, you can just do on, off, on, off, on, off, and you'll be good to go. And that's the way to test the needle on a seat. Now, again, this is a repairable one. Your lawnmowers are not repairable. They are made basically with one piece. The O-ring is at the bottom. The only way to fix this is to get another carburetor. They're about 20 bucks on eBay. Once you get one of those and install it, your problems should be fixed. The way to eliminate having those problems is to make sure that at the end of the season, or even at the end of your use, you run the gas out of the motor. Just leave the motor running until it runs out of gas. That way these vulnerable swelling parts won't be immersed in gasoline, for long periods of time. And again, I think that's just a good practice in general for many of these small engines. Anyway, the whole concept of float, needle and seat, carburetor bowl, emulsion tube coming up, and keeping a fuel constant is basic to all carburetors. Once you learn these concepts, you should be able to rebuild and work on almost anything with a carburetor. If you have any questions, you can always give me a call or chat with Nate, and he'd be happy to help you. Thanks.